Recapping our top story now, the explosion in the New York subway system at the height of the morning rush hour. Police have the suspect in custody. They are combing through video from the scene near Times Square. There's a photo of the suspect. Reportedly, he is 27-year-old Akayed Ullah, and there are other reports that he was inspired by ISIS but did not have direct contact with that terror group.
We will stay on that story. Thanks for joining us.
Outnumbered starts right now.
Fox News alert: an investigation underway hours after an attempted terror attack in New York City at the height of morning rush hour. That explosion went off just blocks from a busy Times Square. And it set off panic, as you can imagine, inside an underground passageway in the subway system. Police say the suspect had a pipe bomb strapped to his body when it went off. That explosion temporarily shut down one of the nation's largest transportation hubs and brought the crowded streets above to a standstill. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, the host of Hannity on Fox Business, Hannity, and Republican strategist, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, former national security staffer under Presidents Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner. And outnumbered today, former press secretary under President George W. Bush, Ari Fleischer, is here. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we got a lot of good news, bad news, hard news.
Typical day.
Okay, we'll work through it. The mayor of New York City is calling this morning's explosion an attempted terror attack. Here's a picture of the alleged bomber. The image was released by the NYPD. He's reportedly 27 years old, was carrying a crude pipe bomb. He apparently was badly injured, burned in the incident. 3 innocent people also hurt. New York City and state officials are saying this could have been much, much worse.
This male was wearing an improvised, low-tech, explosive device attached to his body. He intentionally detonated that device.
The device is based on a pipe bomb. It was affixed to his person with a combination of Velcro and zip ties.
This is New York. The reality is that we are a target by many who would like to make a statement against democracy, against freedom. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor, and that makes us an international target.
Rick Leventhal is live outside the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City. Rick?
And Harris, still plenty of serious armor and heavy weapons teams outside the Port Authority bus terminal. The incident taking place in an underground walkway that connects the Port Authority, which is the largest bus station in America, to Times Square and the busiest subway station in Manhattan. So this individual is walking in that underground passageway and, according to authorities, detonates what's described as a low-tech device that was strapped to his body, a pipe bomb in essence, strapped to his body with Velcro and zip ties. The suspect, as you mentioned, identified as Akayed Ullah, 27 years old, from Brooklyn, possibly originating in Bangladesh. Working to confirm that. Authorities say that he was the only one to suffer serious injuries in this blast, with burns to his abdomen, his hands, and other lacerations. The entire incident captured on transit system video. 3 other people were hurt, but not seriously, described as headaches and ringing in their ears. Obviously, could have been much worse. The Port Authority tweeting out thanks to 4 officers who were the first to collar the suspect: Jack Collins, Sean Gallagher, Drew Preston, and Anthony Manfredin. Those 4 police officers with the Port Authority Police Department, the first to take down this suspect. And of course, authorities now investigating who this guy is, what help he might have gotten along the way, and now also focusing on getting this city back up and running.
New York City is blessed with the finest law enforcement, and what our first responders did today was another example of the ability to address the situation quickly, contain it, and make sure people are safe. Let me just say, it's very important for my fellow New Yorkers to know there are no additional known incidents at this time. There are no additional known activities.
But obviously, that is a key concern, and it remains the focus of this ongoing investigation by the NYPD and the FBI and other agencies investigating who this suspect is. They're now at a home affiliated with him, his address, other locations affiliated with him and his family. Harris trying to piece together what may have inspired this guy to do what he did here this morning.
Rick Leventhal, thank you very much for giving us the latest from the streets of New York where this happened. For more on the investigation, I want to bring in former New York State Homeland Security Director Michael Balboni. Michael, you're with us. And you know, as you look at this, I said good news off the top, and many people may bristle at that. But when you get one of these guys alive, you have told me that that is a day of opportunity. And we had a low hurt rate, if you will, injured rate, the most serious injuries with the bomber.
So, Harris, when you take a look at where this happened, thousands of people go down this passageway every single day. And when you have that any type of explosive device detonate in that confined area in the middle of rush hour, as you've pointed out, you could have a great number of casualties and possibly fatalities. So you are absolutely right. We were lucky in that it did not happen the way it could have. However, there are so many questions. Why a pipe bomb? Why there? Where did he come from? He lived in Brooklyn, but was that where he originated his journey in the morning? Obviously his motivation. What were the means? And they talk about a low-tech device. And that reminds us of the Boston Marathon bombing that used a pressure cooker, but again used low explosive black powder. But of course it reminds us also of Abu Matalov, who was the underwear bomber, that his device went off in a way that did not take down the plane. And so the question is, what was this guy really planning to do? Was it that corridor that was his target, or was he going to try to head up to the Port Authority bus terminal?
Wow. And when you hear the staggering number of people who are gathered at any one point during the day, I mean, they move, you know, north of 1 million people daily through there. But I mean, during rush hour, you've got hundreds of thousands of people moving through, not in one place, but the potential targets are mind-boggling.
And as you know, we've talked about this in the past, the random nature of this type of an attack, where you go to a very crowded subway system, transportation system. How do you possibly anticipate that someone's going to arrive and have a device like this and then detonate at that moment? You know, what were they thinking? And then the other thing is that, you know, I know that everybody's talking about that this is an ISIS-inspired device or attack. I always like to wait a little bit and not presume anything. And maybe that he said something when he was arrested and detained, but I just don't think at this point in time we know all the motivations, but that's what everybody's doing right now. Yeah. They're at his home looking at all the pieces of information to see what his motivation was.
Michael, you bring up a good point, because I know they've had news conferences. We're expecting more to roll out this afternoon as they have more to tell us. But one of the questions has been, what did he say? Was there anything significant? And officials have told us that they're not ready to share that information. So you're right. I mean, we don't know the total picture about even what was happening at the scene per this individual. You know, I want to mention to our audience that you helped write the Homeland Security law here in New York City. So there's some things that you have learned over the decades that are now part of the law, and some things seem to work well this morning in terms of how you heard authorities kind of talking about how they responded, and it wasn't a pat on the back, it's to let people know necessarily where they are in this journey.
So, Harris, an incredibly important point for everybody in New York City in particular to keep in mind. This is such a huge and vibrant city. It also has one of the most effective police forces in the nation, if not the world. And when you have this array of cameras and individual officers who are always patrolling, particularly because this is now the holiday season, that the city has really stepped up, anticipating any type of possible attacks. Of course, you cannot stop everything, but the response is there. And if you want to try something like this in the city of New York, you should take that into account. You are going to be stopped, and if you do have something happen, you're going to be arrested and taken into custody, if not other means taken to take you out, because this is a very secure and safe city, given its size and its, unfortunately, the target that it's always been.
So what does the rest of our day look like in terms of them stepping up patrol? I mean, there are 3,000 officers daily who work the transportation systems at Port Authority, because we're talking ferries, buses. I mean, it's much more than just this one terminal.
Yeah. The Port Authority is a massive operation, and obviously all the airports and the World Trade Center site, the George Washington Bridge, the Pat Tunnel, and of course the Port Authority bus terminal itself, but also the railway lines. You know, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority runs that. Their police forces work hand in hand with the New York City Police Department in and of itself. What they're doing now is, obviously they've secured the site. They're also reassuring the public, but then they're doing the investigation, the forensic examination of what the device was, Are there any fingerprints on it? There's something else you can take from that device itself. And then, of course, they're back in their apartment, his apartment, and talking to neighbors, talking to friends, finding out what's on their computer, who is he in touch with. They're doing that. And then for the rest of the city, the police are out there incredible. They're always vigilant, but it's a part of their job. But they are really vigilant to see, is there anything else going on? Yeah. Is there maybe a copycat possibility or something else? And that's where the city is focused on right now.
Michael Balboni, former New York State Homeland Security Director, thank you for your time and your expertise on this breaking news.
Thank you, Harris.
All right, Ari Fleischer, you have unique experience here on the couch, 9/11, and you have seen this city and all of its resilient parts and heart. Today was a tough day because it's a reminder that we are hated.
We are hated, and we are fortunate. We're fortunate we have law enforcement as good as they are, as tough as they are. But what struck me here today was how lucky we are. You follow this with the Times Square bomber that came earlier, which turned out to be a dud. And remember, a street vendor brought that to the attention of the police. You know, the horrible pattern here is September 11th. It was 4 attacks in a row, obviously much bigger magnitude. In Europe, when they've had things like this happen, it hasn't just been a one-off. It was one attack followed by another, and in Israel often they'll have attacks like this, and as soon as the first responders, the ambulance people get there, second bombs go off. We're very lucky in New York
in
today.
Paris was like that.
That's right.
Yeah, they were firing upon them and trying to harm the officers. Yeah. Yep. Kennedy?
No, it's interesting because what concerns me is obviously we're entering the holiday season, and this is where a lot of people go. This is one of the great destinations on earth for the holidays, and it's so festive. Times Square is arguably the most visible place on earth for the holiday season, and obviously there are people who want to disrupt that. And what I'm curious about, whatever inspired this guy, is there some other system that's inspired other people, to your point? And is there actionable intelligence that law enforcement is working with right now?
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
What inspired him is hatred. It's the normal radical hatred, Islamic hatred for the United States. And that's the frustrating thing about this. Law enforcement will tell you there is no actionable intelligence. It can be anybody, anywhere.
Jillian, where are we in this journey of national security with this issue? It seemed like today is quick acting, and you heard Michael Balboni talking about just the amazing police force that we have in New York City, but that sharing of information all over the country.
And Ari was right to point out that as horrible as it is that this attacker, this perpetrator got this far today, we're also incredibly lucky because something like this, a transit system like the MTA that I think handles 6 million people a day just in New York City, has the potential to be far more deadly. So in the aftermath of this right now, the most important thing that law enforcement is doing is gathering information. Was he connected to anybody else? Was he connected to any cells? Were those cells domestic or international? Quick point that just last week, in response to President Trump's Jerusalem declaration, the State Department issued a worldwide warning for Americans, which essentially tells us wherever you are in the world, in the United States or abroad, you are more vulnerable today than you were yesterday. And I think that to a certain degree, this is going to last well past the holiday season.
Lisa?
Well, and I think also what looms over this, and we're obviously learning more about this guy, what was the source of radicalization, if there are any ties to any terrorist organizations. But we remember not too long ago, there was that image that surfaced from ISIS of Santa Claus in Times Square with dynamite. So I think that looms over this, as well as the most recent terror attack in New York that left 8 dead. And I think as we drive these terrorist groups like ISIS out of the Middle East, many are saying that there's a concern about online, what happens with an online caliphate. And I know that Jillian has written about this for The Hill, very interestingly, talking about that's where the fight is as well. When we drive out these terrorists from their physical locations, of that fight online. So it looks like
when we can find them, many of them have black sites online. Right. Many of them have gone places on the web that we can't find them. We'll move on. Obviously, our coverage and this conversation continues all day long here on Fox. There are a lot of unanswered questions in the investigation into this attempted terror attack, as they're calling it, in New York City. Did the attacker act alone? You've heard that term lone wolf. I want to ask and talk about that more as we widen out and see who people are connected to. Or is this an active terror cell in our city? How concerned should Americans be as we enter the busy holiday season? A lot of questions. And a stunning new Fox News poll, and what it could mean for tomorrow's Alabama special Senate election. We'll talk about that. President Trump stepped up his push to get Roy Moore across the finish line.
The future of this country cannot afford to lose a seat in the very, very close United States Senate. We can't afford it, folks. We can't afford to have a liberal Democrat who is completely controlled by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. We can't do it. Can't do it.
Fox News Alert continuing to watch the investigation into that explosion this morning in New York City. The mayor called it an attempted terror attack. It happened near Times Square in an underground passageway packed with commuters. Authorities say a 27-year-old man intentionally set off a pipe bomb that was strapped to his body. 4 people were hurt, including the attacker. He was the worst of the injuries. The others had concussion-type injuries, ringing in ears, that sort of thing. We're told they're going to be okay. We are following this story, and we'll bring you all the new developments as we get them.
And this is a Fox News Alert. In just about 24 hours, voters go to the polls in Alabama's special Senate race. Democrat Doug Jones and Republican Roy Moore making their final pitches. And President Trump also stepping up his involvement after endorsing Moore last week. Here's White House counsel Kellyanne Conway.
I think the president couldn't be more clear about how he feels about this race. He has said, this is the president talking now, the president has said, go vote Roy Moore. He's made it very clear that he wants that vote in the United States Senate. The president has said a vote for lower taxes and more secure borders, certainly less regulations, more ISIS in defeat around the globe.
New Fox News poll showing Democrat Doug Jones now leading Republican Moore by 10 points. Jonathan Sara is live in Midland City, Alabama. Jonathan?
Hi there. Well, Roy Moore is planning to hold what he calls a Drain the Swamp rally in this barn you see behind me in Midland City, located in the southeastern portion of Alabama. He'll be joined once again by former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who rallied with Moore at another barn in the town of Fairhope last Tuesday. And the campaign is sending out a robocall recorded by President Trump. Listen.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore. His vote is our Republican Senate, and it's needed. We need Roy to help us with the Republican Senate. We will win, and we will make America great again.
A new Fox News poll shows Democrat Doug Jones polling 10 points ahead of Moore. Remember, this is in a state that normally favors Republicans, but some conservative voters are saying the allegations against Moore make them uncomfortable. So to take a pulse of Alabama voters, we sent Fox News producer Dan Gallo to a restaurant in Greensboro, Alabama, called Pie Lab. Their motto is Pie and Conversation, and talking with customers there, he got plenty of conversation about tomorrow's election. Watch.
I'm voting for Jones.
And I'll be voting for Judge Moore.
Truth be told, I haven't really decided yet. My granddad's going to write in about something because he's a Republican, but he don't like Roy Moore. But I'm still kind of tossed up.
Luther Strange was my choice, but I want to keep a Republican in the Senate.
A Doug Jones campaign official has confirmed to Fox News that both former President Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden have recorded robocalls on behalf of Doug Jones. Those robocalls going out to Alabama voters statewide today. Back to you guys in New York.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Now, meantime, not all Republicans are getting behind Roy Moore. In fact, some GOP members of Congress now stepping up their criticism of their party's Senate candidate.
I didn't vote for the Democrat or advocate for the Democrat, but I couldn't vote for Roy Moore. The state of Alabama deserves better.
The Constitution requires us to, if he wins, and still an if he wins, we have to seat him. Then there will immediately be an ethics investigation. We'll have a great opportunity for us to look into all the issues, the allegations, and perhaps even talk with some of the folks who are witnesses. That will give us a clear picture.
I mean, it doesn't represent me. I don't think it represents most of the Republican women, as well as my colleagues like Senator Tim Scott and others, and Cory Gardner have made clear.
So, Ari, what is the bigger problem for Republicans, if Moore wins or if he loses?
I think this is a lose-lose. Look, I would love to have a Republican vote in the Senate. I would hate to lose a seat. But there are other things that come into play. And the thing that, to me, fundamentally comes into play, and I say it as someone with an opinion, not a vote, I am very uncomfortable with 30-year-old men who hit on teenagers. It's as simple as that. It doesn't get more complicated. I don't put politics into it. I don't put vote counts into it as much as I want to win substantive votes on Capitol Hill. It's a moral equation. Now, having said that, and I wish he had dropped out, if he wins, I think Republicans cannot unseat him, cannot throw him out, because this has now been adjudicated by the people of Alabama. They know the facts before them. It's not as if it's a last-minute surprise. They have all these matters to consider, and I don't think the United States Senate can or should overturn the will of the people. And so that's my opinion. It's up to the people of Alabama. But I don't like this at all for the future Republicans.
Harris?
You know, I'm just marveling at how you have done the one thing that others are saying can't be done, and you can hold those two competing thoughts in your head. I mean, they're clearly two things that can exist together. And so where does that leave this party, though? Because if they lean toward where you are as a father, as a human being, you want the women to be heard, so on and so forth. You and I have talked about this before. Then they're thwarting the people of Alabama. If they let everything go through, it looks like, I mean, that's been a Republican seat. It's probably going to stay a Republican seat. We don't know. Those numbers are still, you know, they can move. They always move before elections, those poll numbers. But if you get them in, you have senators who've said that they would constitutionally exercise that right to try to unseat him. And then what do you do?
Well, I just think it's wrong. And I think at the end of the day, you have to go to what's right and what's wrong. And that does become a simple moral matter. And you know,
about political expediency.
About political. And it is important to win votes in Senate. That's what it's all about. But not at the price of everything.
The political price, and I think that's very important to point out right now. But what happens procedurally if Moore makes it to the Senate?
Well, and that's a problem because the Senate would need 2/3 vote. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think you have a lot of Republicans and maybe even some Democrats worried about the precedent that sends to try to expel a duly elected member of the United States Senate, particularly when voters had knowledge of these allegations before heading into the polls.
And that's the key.
And that's the key. What Ari laid out and what you heard from Congressman Barbara Comstock, who is in a deeply competitive district in Northern Virginia, is they sort of feel like this is a pick-your-poison election where you either lose a Senate vote, which gives Republicans 51 votes in the Senate, which means that it's going to be virtually impossible to move legislation forward.
If two people peel off, it's the death of any piece of legislation.
Exactly. Or you have a situation where people like Barbara Comstock and other members of the Republican Party are worried that they're going to have to run alongside Roy Moore in 2018. The only wrinkle there for Democrats is I suspect we're going to hear more sexual harassment allegations from both sides of the aisle. So that would be the only, but that is the reason Senator Franken stepped aside.
Franken, too, is that the voters in Minnesota didn't necessarily know about what was going on. So I completely understand.
Yeah, it was a different level of information when they went to the polls.
Because he actually didn't give the voters the opportunity to know. You know, in this case with Roy Moore, you're saying, look, they know what they know, they vote.
But if he stays, right, if he gets elected and the Senate keeps him in the seat, the cost to the Democratic Party, the cost to the Republican Party is that the Democrats are already lining up and painting Roy Moore as the poster child for all that is wrong with the GOP. That's what Al Franken did even in his resignation speech. Folks like Cory Booker over the weekend have already started to hone in on that. And going into 2018, a very sort of heavy albatross around the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you can hear Democrats almost gleefully cheering for Moore to win because it allows them to embody the opposition. All right, well, it appears to be an attempted terrorist attack just steps from Times Square. What authorities are now saying about possible terror links and if this was possibly inspired by ISIS. Plus, going down to the wire on tax cuts, why Republicans remain optimistic on getting the job done before year's end and the hurdles that may stand in the way. It's all coming up. Stay right here.
If you were just tuning in, why don't you caught up on the huge news that's breaking today? A Fox News alert on what's being called an attempted terrorist attack in New York City during the busiest time of the day. Police are saying a 27-year-old man set off a pipe bomb that was still attached to his body this morning. It happened in an underground passageway near Times Square at the height of morning rush hour. Reports say he was inspired by the Islamic State savages, but law enforcement says he apparently had not had any direct contact with that group. Inspired, not the same as command and control. They're looking into it all. Now the FBI is working with the NYPD to get to the bottom of it. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is collecting the facts for us today from Washington. Catherine?
Well, thanks, Harris. A short time ago, Fox News confirming that the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is on the scene and working jointly with the NYPD. These units specialize in terrorism cases and combine the resources of 12 government agencies, from law enforcement, immigration agents, as well as NCIS and CIE. Meantime, a counterterrorism source who monitors social media tells Fox News there's been no claim of responsibility, though limited ISIS accounts are celebrating, which we have seen in recent domestic terrorist attacks. The device is described as low-tech and strapped to the 27-year-old suspect's body when the NYPD police chief said he potentially detonated the device in that underground passageway at New York's Port Authority. Meantime, here in Washington, the president was briefed, as well as the new Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, who was sworn in just less than a week ago as the 6th Secretary of Homeland Security. Fox News is told that the NCTC, or the National Counterterrorism Center, is monitoring the situation in New York. The NCTC is the U.S. government's hub for threat analysis that was established after 9/11. And now that they've got the identification on the suspect, the NCTC is now running the name through their data holdings, and that includes the watch list. Those searches will allow them to identify close associates and whether the individual was on a watch list or has an existing tie to a known terrorist group. Also this morning, New York authorities are searching the residence.
What I worry about is ISIS sent a message 2 weeks ago saying that we will see you in New York for Christmas soon. And so we know that they're targeting attacks around the Christmas season.
Everything right now, Harris points to a lone actor, but they're going to be looking closely at that device to see whether it was very low-tech, very crude, or whether it had any kind of signature that they'd associate with a bomb maker who may be working in the area.
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. And you actually set it up perfectly for our next guest. The investigation now. For more on it, let's bring in former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis, who led the city's police department when terrorists attacked the Boston Marathon in 2013. He's also a Fox News contributor. Thank you for being with us. So you just heard Catherine talking about the crude nature of this. And I do think back to the Boston Marathon, because that's what was said with the pressure cookers, that they weren't overly sophisticated, but they were effective.
Right. And that's the problem. It's fairly simple to get the recipe for building one of these things from the internet. And as we saw in the marathon, even though they're low-tech devices, they can be very, very effective in killing and hurting people and causing chaos, which in this particular case was probably the secondary aim of the suspect. If he detonated that device inside that small walkway, the possibility of people trampling themselves was very high, and those are injuries that account beyond the explosion.
Well, that's a really good point. And it also brings me to the idea that, you know, you keep hearing the word lucky talked about today. Lucky, I like to say blessed, whatever the situation. But what does that have to do with what we're actually doing to catch these guys before they happen? Because what I've heard you say time and time again is something like this, you cannot predict it, you almost can't prevent it, so then luck has to play a role?
Well, luck is always good to have luck on your side, but the truth is we can't settle for that as a strategy. The NYPD has the best intelligence operation of any police department in the world. They're plugged in all of the places where these guys are operating from. You have the Hercules teams that are out in Lower Manhattan that are a show of force. You see one there on the screen right now. All of these things join together to give us the air of invulnerability, if you will. That's what we're trying to project to people who think that they're going to do something like this. Unfortunately, because there's no security at these locations, just sort of a surveillance of the crowds going by, you can sneak a device in here, and it can cause enormous panic and chaos.
Real quickly, before I let you go, the day after the Boston bombing, I can imagine that all the focus was on then, you know, looking at other sites around the city. That's what we're being told is happening here in New York. It's the height of the holiday season. We have a lot of people congregating, not just in Times Square, but Rockefeller Center to see the tree, so on and so forth. What is that really like to provide that kind of search and readiness for a police department?
Well, I talked to Commissioner O'Neill just a couple of weeks ago about this. They have enormous amounts of assets that are out there watching what's going on, presenting a show of force. But the truth of the matter is, as Congressman McCall just said, there are threats. This is Christmas time. This is a very attractive time for our enemies to attack us. So we have to be on hyper alert right now. We have to be careful of everything that happens out there.
Ed Davis, former police commissioner of the city of Boston, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
A big week ahead on tax reform. President Trump is about to deliver a closing argument for the GOP's tax plan in a big speech on Wednesday. This as House and Senate negotiators work to iron out their differences with the goal of having the legislation on the president's desk before year's end. The president tweeting this weekend, quote, "Getting closer and closer on the tax cut bill, shaping up even better than projected. House and Senate working very hard and smart. End result will be not only important, but special." But hurdles, of course, loom. Maine Senator Susan Collins, whose support was crucial in passing the Senate tax reform bill, says she's not yet decided whether she will back the final measure.
I always wait until the final version of the bill is brought before us before I make a final decision on whether or not to support it. There are major differences between the House and Senate bills, and I don't know where the bill is going to come out.
House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he's very confident Republicans will get it done on tax reform, partly thanks to the president's enthusiastic support.
I've never watched a president so engaged. I was speaking to the Treasury Secretary last night. I talked to the president last week. He is engaged to make sure this happens because he wants to keep his promise to create more jobs and make sure that the middle class in this country gets an increase in their wages.
All right, Ari Fleischer, if they do it right, could be more jobs and a big boost to the economy. There's still some big differences here. How insurmountable is it?
Oh, it's not insurmountable at all. Look, I love this. This is what government is supposed to be about. This is where you have big choices, big decisions, and it ultimately can change the economy and create jobs for people or not. If the Democrats say, no, this will work, it's a tax cut for the rich, and the Democrats turn out to be right, which I don't think they will be, then Republicans deserve what they get. If Republicans are right and the economy booms again, then Republicans can say, we helped drive this because of what we did with the tax cuts. And then it helps Republicans in everything they do in their future. But that's what we are supposed to have government for, these type of big decisions. I love the fact that they're this close. And the ultimate test will come right before the Senate votes on it after the conference agreements reached between the House and Senate.
Yeah.
It'll pass the House. The test is the Senate.
Can I ask a really basic question? Isn't the economy booming right now?
The economy has had 2 quarters in a row of 3% growth. Something
Which
that
is
hasn't happened
higher,
since
by the way,
2014.
than what this is projected to bring at 2.9%.
But here's the problem.
Just slightly higher.
The economy is projected for the next 10 years by the Congress to grow at 1.9%. If we can sustain 3% growth because this tax cut keeps it going, actually raises it even higher to 3.5, 3.4, you know, anything above 2.6 means the deficit will drop. This is huge, and this is what you do. This is how you keep an economy rolling.
Well, and is that enough to gamble on?
And what about the middle class?
Well, we'll see, because another test, the public polling hasn't been that great on the tax reform bill as well. So if they win, they get this done. If they get this done, the other test is selling this to voters and making them believe that this is going to benefit their families, because right now they don't, or at least according to public opinion. But the other aspect, the horse trading on this still isn't done, because remember, to get the Senate bill past the finish line, there was promises made to people like Senators Johnson, Collins, and Flake. And so do those senators feel like those promises are going to be kept, particularly when you look at someone like Senator Johnson? There's the way that pass-through entities are being treated in the Senate bill that differentiated itself from the House bill for small businesses. Is that promise kept? Susan Collins was promised on Obamacare subsidies. Does that end up being kept? So that's another thing to keep in mind when this bill does make its way out of conference.
I think the important question comes down to, does it benefit the middle class? And I think that's where some of these public opinion polls like Quinnipiac and others are showing voters aren't buying that. To me, that's what matters, not the payouts to whatever senators and who supports what. At the end of the day, is this going to benefit the middle class?
But it's not the polls that will decide that. It's real life. And that's the difference. I would not vote on the basis of polls. I vote on the basis of 1 year from now, how's the economy doing?
All right, well, we will see a new bombshell when it comes to taxpayer dollars being paid out to settle congressional sex harassment suits. The latest congressman caught up in the scandal in moments.
Another sexual harassment payout rocking Capitol Hill. Roll call reporting the government paid $220,000 to settle a complaint involving Congressman Alcee Hastings. A former congressional staffer alleges, quote, unwelcome sexual advances and unwelcome touching. The Florida Democrat calling the charges ludicrous and saying he was never informed of any settlement. The payout was also not included in an official tally of payments to settle discrimination complaints against House lawmakers from the past 5 years. This is raising questions once again about the secretive way Congress handles complaints of sexual harassment. So, Ari, you've spent your career in crisis communications and getting out in front of crises like this. So from your opinion, Congress has rocked about this, but how do they get out in front of it? Can they get out in front of it, and what do they need to do?
Oh, there's no getting out in front of it. Their past is coming to catch up with them. Yeah. That's the problem here. That's why these guys are facing it, and that's why you've seen the retirements that you've seen. Look, in the case of Congressman Hastings, I think he knows whether or not he touched somebody inappropriately. That's knowable. He very well may have done that and then said to the people who work for him, make this go away, figure out how to pay off, and he didn't want to know anything more about it. Money doesn't just flow from the Treasury without somebody making it flow. And so this is going to be findable, and that's going to be Congressman Hastings' either problem or opportunity, depends on what the facts show.
So I'm so glad to hear you say stuff like that out loud. I mean, you are one of the most plain-speaking people that I know.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you're in my constellation of teachers, right, in this lifetime. But, you know, that really is the issue, knowing what is knowable. And if it's knowable, why, you know, this is so basic, but why even put yourself in a position of having to defend it?
Yeah, because there is a group of congressmen, especially the ones who have been there for a long time, like Congressman Hastings, who are used to the old boys' cocoon.
That's right.
Or Conyers,
and a lot of the structures of Congress are set up to protect these guys. So those are all breaking down.
And talking about those structures, Kennedy, how much of that do you think this changes? Because there's been legislation introduced, a bipartisan legislation, to bring more transparency, to disclose the individuals' names involved in some of these settlements, and just to bring structural changes to the reporting process as well. So how important do you think that is, and do you think that that is going to have a movement on Capitol Hill?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I'm one of those people, I always lobby for more transparency from the government. And I also think that we should have more accountability and more personal responsibility. That's one of the things you're not hearing from two of the people who resigned, and one of whom may be elected to the Senate tomorrow. And it's interesting because this is not a Republican-Democrat issue. This is not a male-female issue, and that's why you're seeing people from both genders and both parties get together and say, this has to change. You know, we cannot have a system where we protect people in this cocoon where touching someone inappropriately is seen as a perk of the job.
Right. And it is incumbent upon the Congress to figure it out yesterday, because the country first erupted over these scandals that were taking place in the media, right? In the news world, in Hollywood. That pales in comparison to the idea that our elected leaders in Washington, D.C. are spending taxpayer money to pay people off so that they can continue this behavior. It is incumbent upon Congress to set up a model for the rest of the country.
It's all bad.
Sadly, I think we're going to be talking about this more in the coming days. But President Trump is ramping up his feud with the mainstream media, bashing so-called fake news as a, quote, stain on America. You're going to want to stay tuned.